Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Mathieu.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball, and this is episode 57. Today on the podcast, my co-host AJ Mathieu interviewed Greg Atkinson. Greg is the founder of Worship Impressions, which is a church consulting group that works with churches on managing their first impressions, guest experience, and doing church secret shoppers, that sort of thing. He's also the founder of the First Impressions Conference, which is coming up in November, in which AJ and I were asked to participate, and we've got some content that will be released through that conference, which we're excited about as well, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in the interview. But the focus of today's interview was on sort of founding principles or guiding principles or foundational principles that make a good first impression, regardless of the season that we are in. There's so much out there about this new season and post-COVID, and we've done a lot of content on this as well. But what we really wanted to drive into with Greg in this conversation is what foundationally makes a good first impression. What are those timeless truths that no matter what situation is, whether you're in person or online, no matter whether you have to wear a mask or not wear a mask, what makes a good and lasting and positive first impression with guests? I think you're going to want to have your notepad out, and I think you're going to want to be jotting down some notes in this conversation that AJ had with Greg Atkinson. You can listen in right now.
All right, well, welcome to episode 57 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. And joining me today is Greg Atkinson. Greg, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, Greg's expertise is in first impressions in the church. He's authored numerous books on leadership and volunteer teams, and of course, first impressions. Today, he's wearing the hat as founder of the First Impressions Conference. And so we're excited to talk about that. He invited myself and Scott to speak at the conference. And so we've got content that you'll be able to see whenever it goes live, which is on November 4th. Is that right, Greg?
That's right.
And it runs for 3 days.
3-day conference.
Awesome. So this year, is this year 4 or 5?
This is our 4th.
Okay, awesome. So this year's title, though, is Navigating a New Season, which won't come as a shock probably in 2020. We're talking about new things, but how does that apply to the conference, and how did you come up with the title, and what's the angle that you're going for this year?
We're talking about navigating a new season of ministry, of ways to reach people, ways to welcome people in person and online. In 2020, the year of all years, this COVID year, how do we continue to welcome people in as Tom Rainer's new book says, a post-quarantine church? And so we have, it's pretty packed full. It's a 3-day conference. It's 7 hours a day for 21 hours of video content that is just streamed live. There are also breakout videos that will not be seen live. So there'll be about 70 videos seen live and about 50 that are seen later as a breakout. So 120 speakers, a lot of content. But just about everybody in their own way, their own flavor, their own take, their own style, their own expertise is talking about navigating a new season.
Yeah, and I know Scott and I talked a little bit about kind of some of the principles of a revitalized church and a healthy church, how you can continue to reach people, but also because it is a new season, things that we've got to do differently. Much like Rick Warren is talking about, getting out into your community and connecting with people where they are. So I think that's vitally important. And we should have been better at it as a church prior to 2020. So in a lot of ways, COVID has really just kind of forced our hand, I think, to maybe get a little bit more healthy and do what we should have been doing.
I agree.
So let's talk a little bit about, so there's lots of new to learn. There's lots of things that people are experimenting with this year, and will continue to experiment with over the coming months and into 21 and beyond. So, but you've got a long history in first impressions and in helping churches do things well to connect with people. What are some of these principles that you've seen work for years or maybe even decades that won't have to change or don't need to change and can continue to work?
One, obviously, I talk about it all the time when I do podcasts and interviews, and that is that hospitality is thoroughly biblical. Going back to the Old Testament, welcome the stranger, and the New Testament, do not neglect to show hospitality to the stranger. And so welcoming the stranger will always be appropriate. Welcoming the newcomer will always be appropriate. And so hospitality is thoroughly biblical. And as we think about welcoming people to our environments, both online and online and in person, that's something that's here to stay. It's been around from the Old Testament, New Testament, and will always be appropriate. Second, something I talk a lot about is guests are fearful, anxious, and skeptical.
Oh yeah.
And so it's a very brave thing to visit a church. Now, right now, in the time of COVID and the time of online ministry, when people can just flip the channel to YouTube and turn on your church, that's not a big deal. But when the time comes that they walk into your physical doors, that's a big deal. It's a very brave thing to visit a church. And there's so many thoughts that go through a guest's mind. And so we want to do everything we can to smooth the way, to pave the way, to remove obstacles and distractions and barriers, because it's a big deal. And it's a spiritual decision, whether they realize it or not. It's a spiritual decision to visit a local church. Also, I was looking at last year's interview, and I pulled out a quote from one of Gary McIntosh's books, a classic book called Beyond the First Visit, which I'm sure you've read. But he has a quote in there that says, "If guests to our church don't think we're friendly, we're not." And that's something that just doesn't change. If a guest doesn't think your church is friendly, your church isn't friendly.
Yeah.
There are so many times he did a lot of research and surveys, and just like Tom Rainer did, where they would interview guests that visited a church. And if you had asked the church, they would say, "Oh, we're very friendly. We love people. We're very friendly." But to the guests, they would say, "No, they're not a welcoming church. They're not friendly." And so,
yeah, I've never met a church leadership team that I've worked with that said we're not a friendly church. Everybody thinks they are, because everybody has relationships, and that's what's really interesting too, is people, they feel like a friendly church because they're excited to see people that they know. And you've got to be able to get beyond that and realize that the people that don't know anybody there want what you have. And so, it's not enough to walk into a church for the first time or after a few times and see other people loving the relationships they have and feeling like you can't break into that. And so being friendly and happy with one another doesn't mean that a guest feels the same way. In fact, you might even make them just, leave envious, seeing that there's relationships, but they're not welcomed into it. So it's so key. It really takes people to really change their perspective, I think, to be a welcoming church. And that's a culture shift, don't you think?
Yeah. And another thought that to me is timeless, that I speak a lot from a lot of perspectives, depending on what I'm talking about, is ministry is people. Ministry is always people. And so whether we're speaking through a lens of a camera or in person or shaking hands or doing a fist bump and got mask on, ministry is always people. I was talking with my pastor last night, and he was talking about people hurting in the church and things that were going on in the church, and somebody that had overdosed on drugs. They didn't die, but they had to be rushed to the hospital. And ministry is people. Ministry is messy. Another thing that I would say is a timeless principle is the gospel is good news, so smile. The gospel is good news. And I've always said, as a consultant and as somebody that trains volunteers, the best weapon we have in our arsenal is a smile. And so when you see people now that are holding up these signs when people come walking up
Right.
that say, I'm smiling under this mask.
Yeah.
And so you have greeters and parking lot teams that are wearing masks, but they're holding a sign that says, I'm smiling under this mask. A smile is a powerful thing. And believe it or not, and this has been said and proven, and we all know it, you can smile with your eyes. And so
Absolutely.
just being able to give somebody a smile even through a mask.
That's been really funny to me to of course we look at people's eyes maybe even more than we used to, and I try to like even overemphasize a smile to make sure I get enough squint so that people can see them smiling. But it's funny to see other people doing that as well. I even thinking back to this Sunday at church, looking over at somebody as we were exiting and just catching their eyes, and you can tell people are trying to smile as big as they can under their mask.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful thing. Just you see that. I see that in the grocery store, or being out in public when I'm wearing a mask. That you try to smile through your eyes, through the mask, with your eyes. And so, the last thing I would say, I said this on Carrie Newhoff's podcast years ago, when it comes to timeless principles, and that is excellence transcends. Whether you're a small church, a medium-sized church, a large church, a traditional church, or a modern church, excellence transcends. We want to do the best we can with what we have. And so when it comes to how we do online ministry, how we do in-person ministry, transitions, and things that happen on a Sunday morning service and a Sunday morning experience, excellence transcends. And that goes to is your parking lot clean? Are your grounds swept? Or is your grass cut? Just basic stuff. Excellence transcends.
I don't know if there's a shortcut to going from, maybe a smaller church where everybody has been there for years or decades. They all know each other. And maybe they can make a conscious, mental decision we would like to become a more welcoming church, but there's a big gap between where you might be and getting there culturally. I'm not sure what easy tips there might be other than repetition, hearing constantly from the pulpit to welcome people around them. What do you think?
I wrote a book called The Hospitality Ministry Handbook to give volunteers, but it's a culture thing, and it's a matter of creating an environment where people feel welcome and loved and accepted just as they are.
Yeah. Yep. And I think it is a little bit of a slow process because there's a heart change for a lot of people, and it might push people out of their comfort zone to be more welcoming to people that they don't know. That's not easy for a lot of people. So, that's definitely a key thing. The other one is the excellence point that you made. I really love that because so many times, especially, we work with a lot of smaller churches and they feel really limited because of maybe financial resources, tech resources, and even talent resources. And I think it leaves them maybe not even trying to do something with a higher level of excellence because they feel so limited by these lack of resources. How do you speak to smaller churches that know they need to do better but lack resources?
Yeah, I addressed this in it's the big orange book behind me that I wrote called Strengths of Leadership. I wrote it 10 years ago. A lot of it is just a mindset. We are pushed towards innovation through limitation and through times that we are restricted. And we've all experienced that right now during COVID, where we were pushed to go places we have never been before when it comes to streaming and online ministry. When things were taken away and we were restricted and we were limited, we got pushed out of the boat, and that's a beautiful thing. And so with a smaller church, a lot of times it is a mindset. I can remember serving smaller churches and still trying to be as creative and innovative as possible. I remember back in the 90s, doing a passion play, an Easter passion play, where we were rolling the stone away from the tomb as Jesus was coming out, and we were rolling the stone away with a fishing pole. We had a fishing pole that was tied to the stone that was pulling it ever so slowly to roll the stone away. I mean, you can do what you can with what you have, but be creative, be innovative. Don't let that mindset stop you if we've never done it this way before.
Yeah. And I know that's one thing that our team really enjoys is kind of digging deep with some of these churches, especially the smaller ones, to really mine for the little nuggets that they might have that can help them to innovate and get more creative. That's always a fun process. I know you get a kick out of that too.
Yeah.
Well, man, this has been a great conversation, and I'm really excited about the conference coming up. So let's tell people again how they can get tickets and when it is.
Yeah, so November 4th through 6th, it's a 3-day conference. It's all day long. It's like 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern time. So that's 7 a.m. West Coast time. So it's an all-day event, 7 hours a day for 3 days. And that is still not seeing everything. We will still have breakout sessions that you can watch later on demand. But it's firstimpressionsconference.com. You can go there. We have a promo code for you guys, Malfers, promo code. They can save $10 off of any registration. There's 3 different registration types. And so whichever one you were to choose, from cheap to middle to most expensive, whatever registration package you choose to do, you can save $10 off that. And just firstimpressionsconference.com. And you can see all the speakers, all the lineup. And pretty soon we're about to release at any moment the schedule that shows when people will be speaking and what their topic is, what their title is, what they'll be speaking on.
Okay, man, that sounds great. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in today, and a special thanks to my guest, Greg Atkinson. You can get tickets to the First Impressions Conference at firstimpressionsconference.com, and be sure and use the promo code MALFERS for $10 off. So thanks, Greg, for offering that to our listeners. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. And today's show notes will be available at malfersgroup.com/57. It's episode 57 today. And we'll also have the link there for you to get tickets from the First Impressions Conference. Thanks again, Greg, for being on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm honored.
Bye.